Thank you, Mr. Witness. So your group is called the Sustainable Development Institute, right?
Yeah.
Apparently, from what I see, that you said you all have been working secretly, but you're targeted, concerned mostly with OTC. I think OTC no longer in existence here. But you're talking about the people of Bokomo and Goa, Nola district, Bapolu, what's the situation now? Because you all made some recommendations, you all came up with certain findings, but because the way the government was at that time, it could not be enforceable. But do you have a copy of your report that you made to present to us? Okay, we will accept the report and see how that report can come from hibernation, because it's very effective, not just effective to be used for the international community, but to see and make and for the Liberians not to have any teeth. Most time the time was not right. People couldn't talk, you had to go anonymous. And by us not having that report, knowing it, perhaps the Liberian people will be able to understand why certain people were placed on bans, or why certain people were treated the way they are. But if we don't know the facts and they have not been given due process, people will wonder. But if you have a report, we would really like to see that report and see how it can be implemented. We can see probably as a result of that, that now there's stricter measures used now for someone to start logging. Don't you think that could have been some pressure? Because now for the FDA, for you to operate a logging company, you have to go through so many processes. Do you think was that the result of your hard work?
I would be reluctant to take credit for the reforms that we see in the sector today. We may have contributed, but there are a lot of other people who also contributed to the effort. A couple of points, however, I need to make in order to put a number of things into perspective. In spite of the good expressed in the Forestry Reform Law of 2006,
what kind of law? The forestry?
The Forestry Reform Law of 2006, which you refer to as having a lot of stringent measures in order to prevent reoccurrence of some of these developments. I should safely say that unless we thoroughly implement the law as it is, we will very quickly go back to a situation where we will have business as usual. We have started to see examples of that. For example, I said earlier, one of the timber companies to receive the first set of timber contracts, the head of that company was in arrears, owed taxes. He should have been on suspension list when he bidded on public contract. He should not have been allowed to participate in the bid for a forest management contract while in arrears. That's the first point. The second point was that even though he was in arrears, he was still allowed. He went beyond and actually contacted the bid evaluation panel and asked them to delay their report until he could settle some of his arrears with the government, which again was wrong.
Can you be specific? And you know, we got to stop putting the dirt on the carpet. Now you just say one this, one that. Nobody. Could you be specific? Who's the person? What company is? Who the individual? That's the only way. You know, we got to bring the rights into head. Who's that?
The Liberia Tree and Timber Corporation, headed by Rick Stowell.
Headed by who?
Rick Stowell.
Rick Stowell.
Rick Stowell. T-O-W-E-H.
Stowell.
Stowell. In 2002, Rick operated a company called Nelco in Bassa, in the Bassa region. After the concession review, we found that he owed the government more than $100,000 in taxes that he did not pay. He was recommended to be placed on the list of suspended individuals. And the law is structured in such a way that if you are a significant individual from a company that was in arrears, you bring that liability over if you set up a new company. So he should have been on the list of suspended people. Instead of putting him on the list of suspended people, the FDA allowed for him to participate in the bid.
This present government, FDA?
This current government. The contract for Rickstoware, for forest management contract in Riverside is now before the legislature for ratification. So that is why I would be reluctant to say that things have changed. Things have not changed. People have not learned their lessons yet. And the more we talk about these issues, there is now an attempt to silence us as though we were operating in Taylor's time. For example, the managing director of the Forestry Development Authority has recently released new guidelines for NGOs working in the forestry sector, demanding that you must enter into an agreement with the FDA before you do any work related to forestry. So in order for me to criticize what the FDA does wrongly, I need permission from them to be able to criticize them, which is not practical.
Violation of your constitutional rights.
Thank you very much, Madam
Now, but what I want to know, because you see, when people don't know things, what you don't know, you're ignorant of. Now, you've given the name of that particular company, and it's before the legislature for ratification. Have you all, your group or any group, have you all written the legislature to put a red flag to inform them?
Madam Commissioner, a week ago, a little over a week ago, we wrote to the Senate and the House of Representatives. We did issue a statement over the weekend, which we have distributed to different media houses today, raising concerns about a lot of issues with respect to the forestry sector, and that is one of the issues that we've raised for them. When the hearing starts, we will be there to again remind them of those violations. But what we have saying with respect to other resource sectors, there is this argument that we will want to stimulate economic activities in rural areas. We want to create jobs. And because of that economic argument, we sacrifice all the other considerations that we should be making sure that people with integrity re-enter into our logging sector, into our mining sector. We are sacrificing those things based on the mere argument that we need to create jobs, we need to start economic activities, which I think is not very healthy for this country.
That report that you referred to recommended that all individuals and companies that aided and abetted the conflict, they should be debarred and suspended until all the arrests on the taxes and prosecuting those that committed human rights abuses. Now, do you have a list, or were you able to identify such companies?
The concession review report has a list of all those 17 companies that were directly involved in one way or the other in the conflict. The names are there. It also has a list of companies in arrears that should be put on suspension. Those lists are there. All the current government needs to do is to take out those lists and put it out in the public domain and say, we today debar these companies from re-entering the timber industry, and we are placing these people on suspension. In spite of the fact that a couple of months ago, we reminded the Forestry Development Authority, because I participated in the pre-qualification of timber companies as a civil society representative. Our responsibility was to look at all the companies that were coming forward and declaring their desire to work in the forestry in Liberia, and making sure that they met some very basic criteria. I was surrounded by a lot of government people. The argument in there, we need more companies to be pre-qualified so that we can have a larger pool of people that bid on these public contracts.
Here, my ear somewhere, oh, wine.
In new borders. If I may, Madam, Honorable I prepared a critique and sent that to the managing director and said to him, we did do the pre-qualification, but these are issues that I found. Without the list of debarment, we could not stop people from getting pre-qualified. Even though we've got the reports of the Forest Concession Review Committee before us, but the others on the panel argued that we did not have an authority from the Forestry Development Authority to put those people on the debarment list. There were the list of people that should have been suspended and therefore not pre-qualified. Again, there was an argument that we needed more people. So after the pre-qualification, I went back and prepared a report and said, we need to address all of these issues before we do a second pre-qualification. I sent that report to the managing director and gave him 10 working days to react or respond or take action. He did not. When I circulated that report to other actors, both those supporting the forest sector reform and providing support to the government of Liberia, he then responded in 2 sentences, saying these are issues that have got political implications. We cannot just act on them. We will take note.
Political?
Implications.
Okay, but you see, all those concessions, and they have to be, ratified by the legislature. Don't you think the proper, you see, when one decides to take a course, one must be prepared also for the consequences and the obstacles that will come one's way. What you should do, because the end result is to the legislature for ratification, even when the been signed or something. You should make copy of all those things, send it to the various legislators. Because if from their area, send it to them. Somebody might join, might read, some eye might pick it up, some ear might take it, some mouth might take it, some hands or feet. You know, because now you can see if that person who you send it to have told you, and you also put their political implications. Because political implications around here that we've seen the trend have caused us economic implications, criminal implications, loss of lives, property, and even loss of our rights and privileges. So I suggest that you put it, send it to the legislature. If some newspaper can take it out without paying, go ahead. Somebody will listen to it. And now you find yourself in this secret hall, sitting in this secret place at this time, and you present these documents. I am citing the Economic Crime Committee. We'll see to it that it goes down in the history book somehow. Now you need, I see your OTC. Was OTC the only company operating between the period 1997 to 2003?
There were many different companies.
Do you have evidence, or do you know the names of some?
I can name a number of them from the top of my head, but again, I will keep referring you to the Forest Concession Review Report. All of that information is contained in that report in great detail. But just from the top of my head, Maryland Wood Processing Industry operator in the southeast.
Who's the owner of that?
Is Abbas Fawaz.
Abbas Fawaz.
And they, at the time that they operated in Maryland, they also controlled the free port of Maryland. They had management responsibility for the port of Maryland. They decided who could or could not use the free port of Maryland.
We had testimony, and I continue, we had testimony linking that same company with receiving guns.
If you look at the concession review report, there are a lot of accounts in there that you might find very useful for your work.
Okay, and what's the next one?
The Inland Logging Company, operated by Oscar Cooper in Sino.
What's the name of it?
ILC, the Inland Logging Company.
Okay.
Operated by Oscar Cooper in Sino. Again, at the time that he managed the Inland Logging Company in Sino, he was also in charge of the free port of Greenville. Again, no oversight, responsibility for other agencies to monitor and see exactly how much timber was going out of the port. So all the figures we have that you can imagine, and again in Kpaanan, OTC managed the port. They were in charge of the port. So you can see that even with the limited figures that we have, with these serious opportunities for understating what you were sending out because nobody was there to check.
Who's the owner of the OTC?
The OTC has a very interesting history. Gus Van Kouwenhoven, who used to manage Hotel Africa, acquired concessions here under the name the Liberian Forestry Development Corporation, LFDC. What was interesting about that was that the same day that they signed, the government of Liberia signed the concession agreement with Gus Van Kouwenhoven, it was the same day that he also signed a management contract with the OTC. So basically, the government was giving somebody a contract to manage forests that apparently he didn't have the capacity to manage. So right there and then, before the ink could get dry, that same day they headed over to the Oriental Timber Company. But at the same time, he maintained interest and influence in the OTC throughout its operations.
Did you discover any fronting?
This would be a classic case of fronting, if I may say that. If this contract was signed with this company today, giving him the responsibility to manage this forest area, in 2 hours' time, he then signs another contract with somebody else to manage this area on his behalf. If that is not fronting, I'm not sure what else could amount to fronting.
Can you name any other company before my next question that you?
The BIN, Bureau Ivoirien, is French. They were based in the Grand Jide.
They were?
BIN, B-I-N. This was a logging company that was operated by one Salami Mulawi. They were based in Grand Jide in Town, right on the border with Cote d'Ivoire. Again, Salami was named in many different UN panel of expert reports as one of those who were facilitating arms imports into this country.
During what period?
They were there right up to 2003. They worked there from 1997, 98, right up to 2003.
From your own experience, I mean, and perception, wouldn't you look now at the timber industry and those who were engaging in the timber industry during the period in question? Can one conclude that they were those who were facilitating the conflict in this country by maybe giving pay, like to sustain it, maybe paying for ammunition, paying for anything pertaining to the sustenance of this country during that period? Because a lot of money they made money, so in exchange it was this barter or some.
I cannot, I do not have hard evidence to present, but what I can say is that, for example, in 1992, 1993, when Charles Taylor was still a rebel leader, when he had timber companies operating behind the lines in his territory, when he was still a rebel leader.
Yeah, operated by iron.
Behind Taylor's line, in Taylor's territory.
Iron? What the name of the company?
One of them, Kavala Timber, which was operated by Gabriel Doe, who is a Liberian. Another company, Timco, which was operated by Gus before he got the Liberia Forestry Development Corporation, interestingly, was taking timber from Taylor's territory, crossing it into Kpaanan, going across the front lines when people who were trapped behind those lines could not be allowed to come out. Based on those incidences, one can only conclude how was it that they were allowed to operate in that fashion. If money did not change hands, I will wonder how they got that authority, the security, the opportunity to move from one side of the battlefront to the other side with the timber to export them to Europe and other places.
Mr. Witness, on the other hand, I observe and I know that there were timber companies, logging companies, would you agree with me, that were in existence prior to the war. They were even in, some of them were in existence even prior to the 1980 coup in this country. Maybe the Coopers, even the Maryland, Wood, Talk, T-A-L-K, some of them. And these Kavala, even Kavala, I don't know whoever Kavala, Kavala, because we know those, some of those companies existed before the war. They brought in caterpillars, they brought in bulldozers, they brought in equipment to facilitate their work, cut down the trees. They also, because of the where the forests were, they had to make roads, you know, roads to those places, in which brought some sort of development in that area. They built schools, you know. So now, when the war came, those people, some of those people, caterpillars, the businesses, the sawmills, yeah, because some of the same people who were not just exporting, but they even have sawmill companies. But these companies were also affected, that people came, looted, burned down. Are you aware also of some of the casualties and losses these companies that existed on the books long time incurred? So also, like business people all over the world, the businesses, they would cater to the power that be for survival. So also, although these people came and they started doing businesses, would it also not be that the government that were in power also put pressure on them when they needed money, when they needed this thing to say we need money, and they had to pay because they were in certain areas? So when we look at these human rights violations and also fueling money for the war, one should take into consideration that some of these people had to do what they did just for survival?
Honorable Commissioner, maybe before I say anything, I should say to you that when we did the concession review, we found that none of the timber companies, including the ones people thought had the full legal authority to operate in this country, they did not have it. For example, the Tokba Timber Corporation, which is situated in Maryland as well, Maryland Wood Processing Industry, Kavala, they all have concession contracts dating as far back as 1988, 89, 87. None of those contracts were ever ratified by the legislature. By the legislature, which means those contracts were not in effect. They should not have been operating in the forest in the first place. They should not have been there.
You have the LEG, the least educated group, who didn't even know, or they wanted identification with those people where they're giving them some money and you agree for them to do it. Some of those who were there doing it, they said what least educated themselves, the business people. So probably having the sign during those periods, you think they were really ratifying these things? Because there were lots of even UN agreements and so that were not ratified. I saw the other day, just Judy Bryant time, he had to ratify so many UN protocols and agreements. So you look at the period we're in, what was really happening? You see, because they broke the law there. We got good laws. That period got good laws, got good constitution, good laws. But the people don't implement it, they don't know where it is. And so they just go about, once things going by the board, nobody being affected, fine. You going deeper in it, that's why you discover it. But although it was not ratified, but they were paying taxes. Government were using them too, and they were logging company, people were the prime ministers, considered prime minister of Liberia during those days, because they were closer to the powers that be than the people who elected them. So although they were not ratified, but they were doing business. So don't just let us look at the fact they were not ratified. But besides not being ratified, they were doing everything, paying taxes, opening schools, like I said, roads. Did you discover that?
We found that they had not paid taxes amounting to over 64 million United States dollars. All of those companies owe taxes. And what was also very interesting is that instead of paying their taxes, they had a very screwed system. And I think they simply took advantage of weak governance in the country. So they knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew they had obligations, legal obligations. They were failing to live up to those standards that were there on the books. They were fully aware. And in addition to that, I think to accept, or maybe it is difficult for me to try to rationalize what they did. For example, Van Kooijhoven stood trial in the Netherlands for his activities in Liberia, in the timber industry. Our government has not taken any action against Goss in Liberia. God's own people put him on trial. God's own people held him to account for what he did in Liberia. Our government has not taken any action against those people. What I'm trying to say is that because our system was bad, it's not an excuse for anybody who is purporting to be a businessman to loot this country. Because our governments were weak, it's not an excuse for anybody to steal from this country in broad daylight. That is my position.
Yes, everything got time in this world. The time may be getting ripe. And it can only be done with someone like you. Like I say, if you have a cause, continue the cause. Continue to be focused. Take the obstacles, keep the, now you could give in the economic crime, that document that been lying down in the coal for so long. That got names on it, the forestry people coming up. Now you see you can present to us a letter from FDA saying so and so got political implications. This one, after comprehensive peace accord say, go back to Liberia, look at economic crimes, go back, go have election, go back, go have good governance. So the time might be now. But you can see how difficult it becoming already when people talk about political implications, and you see how the boat beginning to rock all kinds of ways, even sitting now the TRC, the boat, you know. But you need people who will stand the storm. So you just said that Ghost has not been prosecuted in Liberia. You just bring it forth, what do people know? Evidence. God, to prosecute anybody. Not just talk, cheap talk, well, yeah, say you must have facts. You must have the evidence. And criminally, it must be beyond reasonable doubt. It's not preponderance or evidence how many people talk. If they can bring the evidence, then government can. Government just in the crawling stage. They need people like you all to help it to get a go-kart for it to start running. Secondly, did you observe when I talk about fronting from those companies? Did you discover that government officials, the top level, the middle level, were involved in some of those same companies? In essence, if they were not shareholders, that you know their name written on the paper, but probably they were providing them with money to take their trips, to do other things, because now you just presented, talk about some voucher from the finance ministry. The deputy minister asking, telling them to pay OTC, that God's company, how many $1 million?
$50,000 to transfer that to Hotel Africa.
$250,000 to Hotel Africa. Maybe you think they were using the facilities of Hotel Africa or some of the government? What were the reason? Did they get any reason for the voucher?
Basically, they just say this amount is due in taxes to the government of Liberia. Flag receipts will be issued, your corporation as evidence of payment, as soon as acknowledgement is received from the bank.
So that taxes now, we were paying government, were paying taxes for Hotel Africa. And you talk about almost $8 million. That from who to who?
All of the invoices in here, all of these instructions were issued by Juanita New individually on her own signature.
To who?
To
in favor of?
In favor of the Oriental Timber Corporation.
In favor of who?
Of the Oriental Timber Corporation.
That one company?
Yeah. All of the transactions here were related only to the Oriental Timber Company in that 1 year. And this is what they would do. After that, they would then prepare a credit note, certificate statement of account between Oriental Timber Corporation, the Minister of Finance, and FDA. Having verified the various payments made by OTC to government of Liberia or GOL and the obligation due by OTC to GOL, we, the Minister of Finance and FDA, on behalf of the government of Liberia, certify the following statement. And then they list out the payment. Then they issue these certificates confirming that the money has been paid to government when in fact the instruction was to transfer the money somewhere else. But then they will bill the government for the receipt.
Well, Miss Neal is still around. She doesn't have that position, but I'm sure she'll be able to give some explanation. She should give some explanation to us, because I'm sure since her signature is there, she might know more of the transaction. Thank you very much for giving us such information and to start the ball rolling for this economic crime, for people to come and explain why those money was spent, the reasons why. And I hope more will come, not just the timber company, but other companies too, including the telephone companies, the cell phone companies, the many other companies, and individuals too, whose salary was less than $1,000. But we see that real estate more than $2 or $3 million. Let us find out whether or not they were selling us up or using their office to get money at the detriment of people's lives, property, and the country. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Witness, for taking up your time to come and testify, giving us some of the information you have gathered through your research. I want you to look at the paper that you presented. The third paragraph on page 1, after you listed 1, 2, 3. In that paragraph, you said, promoting good governance in the natural resources sector is therefore a major prerequisite. Is a requisite or prerequisite for making the natural resources? You got prerequisite.
It should be prerequisite.
Prerequisite. Thank you. So I hope that correction is done on the document. You also express your concern in the last paragraph of that first page that the present government, led by perhaps the most high-profile opposition and critic of former President Charles Taylor, then appears to be determined to maintain former President Taylor's most notorious legacy. Can you further explain what you're talking about?
Thank you, Honorable Commissioner. To give a little bit of background to that statement, in 1997, 1998, the government attempted to give out concessions in Bokomo and Gongulana districts in Bapolo. Those two districts were once one chiefdom, Bokomo chiefdom. The people of that chiefdom have got the whole collectively deed to their land. The chiefs, the elders, the inhabitants, they've got a deed in fee simple to their land. When former President Taylor attempted to give out concession on their land, they said to him, no, 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 this is our forest. We've got title to this land, and that covers the trees that stand on the land. The then acting managing director of the Forestry Development Authority, Honorable Wayne Bryan, wrote to the president and said, these people have got title to their land. In the past, we've always allowed for them to negotiate for concession on their land. The government has always in the past attested to those agreements, and in return they receive their full land rental on which they pay taxes to the state. Following that exchange, in 2000, interestingly, the government changed the law, the forestry law. And the most important element of that change was that the state, the republic, owns all forest resources. Whether you own private land or not, the state owns those resources. Effectively separating the trees from the land on which they stand, which was wrong, which is still wrong today. In 2006, there was an acknowledgement that that was wrong. When the forestry law was rewritten, it read, the forest belongs to the people, but is held in trust by the republic. Notwithstanding, it made very clear provisions that the government cannot issue contracts for private land. The private landowner will have the right to negotiate for contract, for logging contract on their land. And only after they have negotiated and given written permission to the person who wants to log on their land, would the government then go into negotiations with that particular company. However, what we've seen recently is that the FDA went ahead, in spite of protests from the people in Bokomo and Gongulala, and issued 2 different contracts on their land. In Bokomo district in Bafolo County. One forest management contract, which is around 120,000 hectares, overlapped with the land in Gongulala end. They have made series of representations to the Forestry Development Authority, challenging the authorities' right to issue contracts on their land. They have they invited Honorable Woods to a meeting in Bopolu City, invited the legislators, and said to him, you have no right to issue contracts on our land. Can you please stop? He refused. Today, the timber sale contracts that were issued in Bokomo have been signed by the Forestry Development Authority. The forest management contract that overlaps with the land in Gongulala is before the legislature for ratification. With all that, up to 2-3 days ago, they were still begging, pleading with the president not to allow those contracts to go ahead. As I speak, I am not aware that that decision has been reversed. And as I said earlier, that will amount to seizure of community property, because they've got property rights to the land, and it should not be subjected to government contracts. That is what I mean by that statement.
Can you give me time, please? In telling the story of organized looting and pillage of Liberia's forest, he said that some foreign companies, foreign and local companies, and government officials under the guidance of former President Taylor helped to loot and pillage the forest. My question is, do you know the names of some of these business people, both local and foreign? And whether you also could identify some of the officials of government at the time? And what do you mean under the guidance of former President Taylor? And I want to, if you are not prepared to give the detail here in this public hearing, and you would like to do so in camera, you are privileged to do that. But if you think you are free, you can give the names of those people. Okay.
I said earlier, I actually recommended that the commission request copies of a forest concession review report that was done in 2005. It details all of these individuals and companies. However, I think it's public knowledge that at the time, Bob Taylor, who is the brother of former President Charles Taylor, was at the head of the Forestry Development Authority. It was during his tenure at the Forestry Development Authority that companies like the OTC were given a green light to operate here. The Exotic Tropical Timber Enterprise, ETTE, was operated by perhaps one of the most notorious figures that ever entered the timber industry, Leone Mini. This man was arrested in Italy on completely unrelated charges, prostitution and drugs. But what investigators found his person was astonishing. Records of arms shipments to Sierra Leone via Liberia, different transactions between he and President Taylor with regards to monies that were being paid directly to President Taylor and money that was being paid to him to facilitate imports of different weapons. There were documentary evidence that were also picked up on his person at the time of flights directly from Burkina Faso, some of which originated actually from Eastern Europe to Burkina Faso to Liberia, and those arms ended up in Sierra Leone. So all of that information is public information, it's all out there. And as head of state, as president, as commander-in-chief, and the way that government operated, nothing happened. Well, maybe I should modify that. Very few things happened without his direct say-so. For example, when the Oriental Timber Company was launched in Kpaanan, he was there, and he said, and I quote, "This is my pepper bush." And I think every Liberian understands when somebody says, "This is my pepper bush." And to his word, he stood by the Oriental Timber Company. Even when they were organizing militias, even when they were harassing people, to the extent that John T. Richardson, because he was running a trucking company, Jog, they had gone down to Kpaanan to lift fuel. His truck driver, cowboy, were arrested by OTC militias, locked up, in spite of the fact that he was very influential and a very close friend of the president. He ran up and down in Monrovia to get his people released. That did not happen. It took him to grant a press conference to reveal to everyone that this was unacceptable. So when I say under his guidance, I say that because all of those things happened. He was fully aware of a lot of these things, and his position of influence actually allowed most of these people to carry out the activities that they carried out. The OTC enjoyed maximum security from the state at the time that they operated the way they operated, to the extent that even when you were traveling in Riverside, if you stopped in kilometer 85, if your vehicle broke down, they will order you to push your vehicle from there, because they did not want anybody photographing the timber stock that were being stockpiled at kilometer 85. And anybody who didn't know, if you strayed into the area and came across some of those securities, they will intimidate you. If they saw you with a camera doing photographs, they will take that from you. And all of those things happen, and I'm sure he was fully aware that those things were happening. That's the reason why I say under his guidance, he allowed for it to happen.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Presenter, I just want to thank you very kindly for responding to the call of the Commission to come and share your experience and expertise with us. It is our knowledge that you have worked in this sector as far as its sustainable development is concerned, and on issues of corruption associated with this sector. We've received your presentation and you've gone through question and answering. I'm confident that as the work of the Commission progresses in this area, you will still be available whenever we see the need to call you in. So I want to thank you very much for coming and supporting this effort of the Commission. Thank you.
Okay, again, before turning over the floor at this time, I would like to ask a couple of questions myself. First of all, you mentioned about groups identified as a cartel that involved themselves in the looting of the country's resources. I was wondering whether your company or your organization has ever done a detailed study of the structure and owners associated with this cartel, or is it just an uncertain type of structure that we only know in Liberia as OTC or local companies? Have you done any more in-depth research to link some of the foreign companies that are linked to this particular local group?
There's been a lot of work, research into that, not by my organization, but by other organizations that we work very closely with. So I will leave that question for some of those who will be talking to the Commission maybe tomorrow or the next day, because I'm aware. We work with them very closely. They handle the international investigation. We did internal work, so they will dwell on that. But internally, the reason why I refer to them as cartel is that these were not ordinary business people. Most of them were criminals. Leone Menes, for example, he's not linked to any established international logging company, for that matter. So the exotic tropical timber enterprise in Liberia was more of a vehicle for him to carry on his other activities on the ground than it was a logging company. That's the reason why I refer to them in that fashion. These different activities in Liberia were mere vehicles that were being used to carry on the activities here. The same with BIN, for example.
Thank you. Regarding the government side that you mentioned, did your research go into any greater depth with regards to government officials that may have been involved during that time? I assume you're looking at a time frame of what, 1979 to 2003, or did your work go further than that? And were you able to identify the broad spectrum of people who may have been directly linked to this type of economic crime syndicate that was operating during that period?
We looked at the sector basically from 1997 up to the present. The most visible people, and you should, if you go back a couple of years before 1997 and look at the time when, for example, Charles Taylor was still a rebel leader, he had his own version of the forestry development operating behind his territory. Some of the individuals that were at the hierarchy included Wayne Bryan, who later on went on to work at the FDA in Monrovia after his election, and Anthony Tapla. I understand he's now teaching at the University of Liberia. They operated the Forestry Development Authority under Taylor as a warlord, MPFL, FDA. In Monrovia, when he became president, his brother, of course, came into the to head the agency. Again, Win Bryan and Anthony Tapla were his two principal deputies when he was there. And a number of individuals who today are still in the FDA. And what a lot of them did as foot soldiers, if you will call them that, little men on the ground there, these were people who were supposed to be accurately recording how much timber was being harvested, making sure that no logging company was harvesting more than they should be harvesting, making sure that the right classification of the timber was being recorded, because according to the grades, that's how the value is established. For example, Eki will be sold for like $80, while others will be sold for $225, $250 per cubic meter. So if a little man down there classifies a SIPO as Eki, just by doing that, for example, a SIPO, which is $220 per cubic meter, if there were, say, 9 cubes in one piece of log, that would be about pretty close to $2,000 for just that one piece of log. Whereas if you misclassified it as Eki, for that same 9 cubic meters, that would be 80 multiplied by 7, that's like $720. $560 thereabout. So you're talking about a loss to the state just on that one piece of round log of a little over $1,000, just on that one log. Add that up over a single shipment, for example, of 33,000 cubic meters. If you classify the timber from high species to lower species, you're talking millions of dollars that you lose with just a stroke of a pen. So for some people, they would think that the little men in FDA didn't cause that much damage. But in reality, they were a part of the problem. And they are still there today. And the fact that nobody has been held to account to respond to these issues of millions of dollars that has been wasted, it pains some of us. It really hurts some of us.
Thank you. So you're saying, in essence, the so-called foot soldiers, like civil servants,
yeah,
people who should have been standing up for their country and honestly giving proper due cause of ratings for the various logs,
yeah,
were cheating,
yeah,
just for their self-purpose. Right.
And if I may add on that, before a particular area was given out, was supposed to be given out as a concession, these people had to go in the field and verify that that area was not under any existing contract. But when we did the concession review, we found that the total area that had been allocated for timber concession was 2.5 times more than what we actually have.
Oh.
So instead of approximately 10 million acres, we actually gave out approximately 24 million acres. So we were putting concessions on top of concessions, overlapping. The entire country was, when we did the GIS presentation, if you look at the map in that report, you will see that all the concessions overlap. The whole country is covered up in logging concessions. We were giving out forests that we did not have, simply because these foot soldiers were not doing their job properly in the field. They will come back and say that area It's not occupied. It doesn't belong to anybody. It's vacant. And the bosses will issue new contracts for those areas, when in fact it was actually occupied by another logger.
Thank you. Another point, who in your opinion would be responsible for the type of gross corrupt practices that happened during that time? You mentioned the prospects of over $109 million being just lost. Now, before you answer that question, that $109 million, was that just gross revenue, or was that tax money that was lost?
That's they call the freight, the value, the freight on board.
Or just the base
Yeah.
value?
So, but based on that, the government was supposed to assess revenue. So we lost that revenue that we were supposed to assess on that amount. And there are two groups of people here. Those that were making the decisions at the very top level, and those that were providing the data on which those decisions were based, which the group that I refer to as the foot soldiers. Some of them have said to me that it was suicidal to report violations by the OTC. You will get kicked out or you will get dismissed. But I don't know of anyone that reported and got dismissed. So I find that very difficult to believe. So as much as the decisions were being made at the top, I think those foot soldiers also bear equal responsibility, because it was based on their information that we were incurring all of those losses. I think if somebody from the sector had stood out and said, what is happening is wrong, maybe they would have been singled out, maybe they would have been harassed, but at least we would have had an insider coming forward and saying this is wrong, and on that basis other people may have taken up that issue and acted accordingly.
So there was almost a culture of fear and intimidation that was used to keep people working and not exposing what they knew was wrong.
I think some of them benefited from it as well.
Ah, okay.
So it was not entirely about fear. Okay. I think when people make those assertions, it's more about trying to cover their own backs than being truthful. And I share one small experience with you. In 2004, we decided to hire a logger to work with our organization. We invited a number of people from the FDA for interview. At that time, the average salary of the skillers and the other people out there was like $30, $40 per month. We offered them $250. And they said, no. The minimum I can take is $750 or $800. And I said to them, you earn $30 and you seem to be happy. Why are you refusing $250? And they said, well, you know, when the timber company starts to operate, that whole thing is going to change. Which means they were aware that there were opportunities for rent seeking, for bribe taking. So they were not prepared to work for a decent salary. They were prepared to hang on until timber sanctions are removed, logging companies come back, and they can again go back to operating the way they operated in the past. So I would not leave it entirely to fear. I think this was an instance of people consciously carrying out rent-seeking activities and corrupt practices.
Okay, another point. So the issue, I was trying to bring the parallel between the government and its employees and its officials and the international companies themselves, this cartel. Whether it was just government using them or they themselves coming in with a criminal-minded motivation and focus to exploit the country, or did they really want to be honest but they're put under pressure to just do this kind of thing with regards to arms deals, etc.? So what does your research show in that comparison?
One of the things we found was that just looking at, for example, the way the Oriental Timber Corporation operated, you could see a combination of the two. While officials thought they were ripping off the OTC, sending people there for money without properly documenting them, single-handedly authorizing these kinds of transactions. The OTC, on the other hand, was over-harvesting and now reporting millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of timber that they were shipping out of the country. So while our people thought that they were taking advantage of the OTC was taking advantage of the lapses that were in the system, because it didn't serve the government officials at the time. It did not serve them their own purpose of being vigilant on the OTC. So by slacking, in order for the OTC to respond every time they have a demand, the OTC also took advantage of that. So it was a two-way traffic. You think you're exploiting me, but I also think I'm exploiting you, because I'm taking advantage of the fact that you are not paying attention to me anymore.
I understand. Another point, from the point of view of legal reforms, do you have any specific thoughts or recommendations that could help make sure that we don't return to this past culture? In fact, you iterated there just now that it seems we're slipping right back into it. So are there any particular points that your group and civil society have been focusing on as key critical reforms that need to be put into place or looked at during this time? Because TRC is very much interested in these kind of issues also, that you'd like to share with us.
I think, as the Honorable Commissioner pointed out, it is one thing to have good laws on the books, and it is one thing to actually move to implement those laws. Currently, we don't have a perfect law, but we have one that we could work with to make sure that has sufficient safeguards to make sure that we don't slip back. But what we see happening is the manner in which it is being implemented. So perhaps that's where we need to put the brakes on. For example, back in 2006, when the law was being debated, some people fought very hard to remove the provision for the legislators to ratify the logging contracts. Some of us said no. That is the last check you have on the executive. You cannot remove that from these 25-year contracts. One of those persons came back to me this year and said, now I understand why you argue so hard to maintain the ratification. Those clauses are there, those provisions are there. But the way they are being implemented is perhaps the problem that we need to tackle. If, for example, if you look at the provision requiring pre-qualification, it's very clear who can pre-qualify and who cannot. But when you start to twist the law in a way that you're walking on the margin, on the very thin line between illegal and legal, the potential of you slipping over into the illegal is very high. One of the recent cases, for example, with the export of some abandoned logs in Kpaanan, the FDA sent some of its staff to assess the logs in Kpaanan for them to be auctioned. They went to Kpaanan and came back and said there were about 3,000 plus cubic meters of abandoned logs. On that basis, they opened a bid process. One of the timber company won, Unit Timber. Unit Timber went in and did their own assessment of the timber that was there. They came back and said, oh, actually, there's more than 9,000 cubic meters, not 3,000 cubic meters. We're talking about 6,000 plus cubic meters of logs that somebody could not see in the port of Kpaanan. How that's possible, I'm not sure. There was a decision within the FDA to devalue the timber from Class A to Class C, which meant the taxes that government was going to make on that was drastically reduced. It took the UN panel of experts and ourselves to say, why are you devaluing this timber? These are eki. Everybody in the industry knows that eki, when it's dry, is good for processing. It's still good to be processed. And that is one of the strongest tropical hardwood you find. So the timber is still good. Even when the company went in and did some cross-cutting, you could see that the timber was still very good. They came back, and the third point was, even though they were required to put the timber out for bid, the bids were announced like on Christmas Eve, and by January 1st they were concluded. You ask yourself, with the communication infrastructure we have in this country, how could you announce a bid in Kpaanan on Christmas Eve and expect companies to prepare themselves to submit the bid by January 1st, January 2nd? There was no time. So we ended up with a single company. And what they said they were for, that became the highest bid price. When you put all of that together, and we made an issue out of that, the response that Honorable Woods made to those complaints was that this was done as a matter of expediency rather than law. I am quoting it directly in his correspondence. This was an issue of expediency. We want to get rid of the old laws. So the law had to be sacrificed. If you start to hear those kinds of comments from public officials who are supposed to be upholding our laws, then you become very worried. In addition to that, they went back, they revalued the laws and added on additional 74 United States dollars on top of what the value that they had given earlier, which was $120 per cubic meter. So just by raising the flag on this, they add on another $74, and the company did not even flinch. They went ahead, they paid the money. So we were losing $74 on each cubic meter of over 9,000 cubic meters of logs because somebody sat in Monrovia and decided unilaterally that the logs in Kpaanan were not good enough, so they were selling them at $120. We would have lost over 6,000 cubic meters of log if the company had not come back and said, actually, there are 9,000 cubic meters. Because somebody in Monrovia who should have gone to Kpaanan to check, to count how many logs we had there in the port, they didn't do their job properly. So these things are still there. Even though the law is clear, the law provides for competitive public bidding, proper assessment and evaluation of the laws before you put them out, they are not being followed. So if we can only focus on implementing what we have now, I think we would have made a lot of progress.
Thank you very much. I see now that the problem is not so much the rule of law, but the rule of man and his heart.
Yeah.
How people have been able to live up to the values and ideals that can make this country a better country. We need to find such people. And at least your organization seems to be beginning that kind of process. My last question I would like to look at is, we're also concerned about the issue of reparation, about the issue of reconciliation. During these years of where the locusts have eating up everything from this country, people who were poor, some of them we find them rich now, people who were rich have now become poor. The country is in a state of confusion and development. We have debt factors of billions of dollars when we ourselves could never even dream of having a budget of billions. And when you look at all of this, you tend to wonder, how can we reconcile it? How can we give hope to the hopeless? So one area we're looking at, the Act tells us we need to look into this reparation factor, or what they call trust fund, finding some funds that can be used to help deal with the past in an amicable way. I mean, we're not talking about individuals so much, but from a larger community or other perspective. But it would seem that this kind of reparation should not only go to, of course, victims, those who have suffered a lot in the war as a result of losses, but we think of, even from an economic perspective, strong and good business people who have lived and tried to do honest business in this country. Just as you gave an example of a man who came forth and honestly told what was there when he could have covered it up, paid less, and gotten away. People lost millions in this period because they refused to be corrupt and wanted to preserve their situation, but other companies came in, other leaders came in and took over their property and possession. I mean, though I don't want to talk on myself, but I happen to be a living case of one of those situations. So I was wondering, what do you see in the civil society with regards to reparation? There's a lot of money out there that's said to be due back to the government. Taxes that were due. Many people are doing investigations to see how we can get some funds back from economic crime. When this money comes back, what would be your input that you would give the TRC with regards to how some of it should be used with regards to the dealing with the past and reparation? Would you like to share any light on that?
If you permit me, I will try to be a little bit pessimistic on this one. I do not honestly believe that this government has got the will to be able to go after those people, for us to be able to collect the $64 million plus that I'm talking about we lost in unpaid taxes. I really don't believe that that's going to happen. But if that happened, there's a little boy on this cover. I took this photograph in Riverside. I have gone to do some field work. The people have prepared food for us. And I'm one of those who refuse to take bottled water with me when I go out in the field. I asked for water, and they said, oh, he's preparing the water. And I was like, he's preparing the water, and I turned. And there he was. When you look at this photo, what they were doing, they would plant the pillars and cross a stick on top of them and hang a bag of sand. Because the water was so filthy, they would take the water and dump it into the bag of sand. And gradually it would seep through that sand, the mud will remain in the sand, and that's the water we were supposed to drink. That struck me very hard. And without thinking, I grabbed my camera and just took a shot. When you go to Riverside today, nothing's changed for those people. When you go to Bassa, you go to River G, nothing has changed for those people. You go to Sino, nothing has changed for those people. The people who live in and near the forest, nothing has changed for them. If this government will want to make up for the wrong, for the deprivation that our people have been subject to since the logging industry came into being, I would expect that they will take steps now to ensure that money generated from commercial activities in the forestry sector go back into those communities. Central government should find money elsewhere for development in Monrovia, to relay our quota in Monrovia. Let's find money elsewhere. Money from the forest should go back to those communities. That's where it is needed most. The current law makes an attempt to deliver that. But again, what we started to see is disheartening. The law promises 30% of land rental to go back to the communities where timber is harvested. the communities are supposed to negotiate a social agreement with logging companies that operate in the area so that they can also reap some additional benefits directly from the timber companies. But what are we seeing? In River says, for example, when the FDA went there with the Liberia Timber and Tree Corporation to facilitate, that was supposed to be their role, to facilitate the negotiation between the communities and the company, they already carry a 4-page draft agreement that was developed in Monrovia here. Even though the law says that the communities are entitled to minimum $1 per cubic meter of logs harvested in the area, they made that the maximum. When the people said to them, can you allow us some time to discuss this in our community and you come back and then we'll negotiate, they said to them, if you don't sign the agreement tonight, the company will leave tomorrow. It will not come back. And this is after the company had killed 2 cows, taken several cartons of Nikon products to the village with 6 bags of rice. They are throwing a party. People spend the whole day feasting. In the evening, you can imagine that everybody was a little bit, dull in their thinking. And they signed this agreement around 10, 11 o'clock in the night. So what I'm trying to say is that those little promises that are there, if only we can fulfill those promises, things would have changed. Things will change. And as a result of that, people are extremely disappointed. Very, very disappointed. In Bokomo, for example, after this standoff I talk about between the people and the FDA, they finally said, can we meet in Manakwala, in the central town, in the district? FDA, our people, everybody, our legislators will all sit there and resolve this issue once and for all. That should have happened on the 29th of December of last year. The FDA agreed to go to that meeting. While the legislators were there, they took a different route and went to the village where the concession is situated and got the people there to sign an agreement with the company, leaving the leadership and the people waiting for them in Manakwara. If you talk to people, for example, Honorable Dixon Yasia, who is the representative of that district, Senator Nathan and the others from Mapolo, they are all extremely upset about this. So if we are not sincerely implementing what we have today, I don't see the point in trying to craft new laws or new legislation, because they will end up again on the shelf. I think we would do well to implement what we have today and work with all the different stakeholders. And as I said earlier in my presentation, when we talk about these things, when we raise these issues, the FDA sees us as enemies to the extent that they will want to take the Minister of Planning and Economic Affairs functions of regulating NGOs' activities and take it over to Congo Town to the FDA central office, totally disregarding the fact that these responsibilities, in order to make sure that the entire civil society NGO sector is well coordinated, that's why it sits with the Minister of Planning and Economic Affairs. If you got issues, go to the Minister of Planning and Economic Affairs and work those out. In the 21st century, we should not be aiming to silence civil society actors that are doing no wrong other than trying to bring these issues to the public attention. I am quite sure I will get a number of phone calls after here today, but that's another matter. I really, I have prepared myself. But there are other people who, in a lot of ways, are not as strong as we are, and by attacking them in this manner, in this form, it actually flies in the face of our professed commitment to upholding the rule of law and good governance. So, in short, I will not push for new laws. I will push for proper implementation of what we have on the books today. That is not to say there are no issues that need to be clarified in the current legal regime. But I'm only saying, if we are not implementing what we have, there is, for me, no reason why I should be spending my time trying to rewrite new laws.
Thank you very much again. And I must say on behalf of the committee, oh, okay, we have a question before we.
With the permission for the oversight chair for economic crime, when you were speaking and answering a question, you talk about the role of OTC lawyer. Who was the lawyer then for OTC?
I will have to, I'm not quite sure, but that must be, I think, Councillor A. Pierre.
James A. Pierre Jr.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, as I was going to say, well, first of all, the committee is very happy for the presentation that you've made, and we feel that you have been well chosen for this particular purpose. We do hope that all of these documents that you've mentioned, we will be able to receive them. We have the hearing officer there for what you do have, and what you have in other places, we'll follow up with you to get those information. So we'd like to say thank you, but I will officially turn the floor over now to the chair of the commission, who will then do the final closing for this program.
Thank you. I want to take note that your presentation didn't contain recommendations, but rather you would have preferred it came throughout our interaction. And we've gathered several recommendations and want to thank you and show you that you have added some value to our work. The last question I'd like to ask in that direction is, how do you link sustainable forest development to poverty reduction? Do you see a linkage? Can we manage the forestry industry and resources very well to reduce poverty? Are there few benchmarks you could just highlight? If not now, maybe later.
Yeah. There is a very interesting development in the sector right now. I think over the last 2 years, the value of forests standing is on the increase, because globally it has been recognized that forests contribute, deforestation contributes to about 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, in order for the world community to combat climate change, we have to do all we can to reverse the trend of deforestation. Towards that end, Norway set up a $600 million fund per year that they put money into, that they will support activities, sustainable development activities in forest nations. They have expressed interest in Liberia. I am aware of that. During the discussions on that in Poznan, in Poland, last year, one of the questions that they had asked was, how much do you expect to make from logging? One of the people on the Liberian delegation said, we expect maybe $20 to $25 million per year. The guy needing the Norwegian delegation comment to that was that, what if we provided you plus more than the 20-25 million you're expecting? Would you stop industrial logging for export, and only focus on small enterprises for domestic use? So you're supposed to get $20 million, $25 million. We'll give you, say, $30-35 million, and we'll tell you to stop industrial logging. The FDA has indicated that it's not very keen on that proposal. Last week, the Prince of Wales, who is next in line to the British throne, he sent a delegation here. He also has expressed interest in working with the government of Liberia to be able to come forward with the money plus more that we will make for industrial logging. His definition, one of the people on the team, when I spoke to them, he said to me, $25 million sounds like a lot to generate in timber revenue. But we're talking about a decent amount of money. When the white men tell you decent amount of money, he's talking about several tens of millions of dollars. Their proposal is, if the government can get back to them by March to tell them this is what we will need in order to forego logging, industrial logging, not for domestic consumption, industrial logging. If the government can say this is what we will need in order to put a stop to it, they are prepared to put the first year money right away on the table, one lump sum, and then work with the government in the course of this year to do a proper economic analysis of the forestry sector, to see how much additional speed-up industries that should have come from the timber sector. Say, for example, people doing, people trading bushmeat on the side of the road, local people selling their banana and planting to the industry. That entire economic change, how much will the rural economy be losing? So that by the end of this year, we have a reasonable figure, $30, $40, $50 million per year, that they can put forward, say, in 10 years' time, we will give you this money every year. 10 years, because in December this year, there will be a climate agreement signed in Copenhagen, which will have a mechanism that will be able to pay countries for forests to keep the forest standing as a way of combating climate change. That will take a little while to mature. So that's why they are saying we will put in this money now over the next 10 years. So you got that money while this keeps mature and it takes off. So they made that proposal to the government a couple of days ago. They asked for some feedback in March because the G8 will be meeting in the UK. Like most politicians, Prince Charles would like to use that opportunity to announce a project in Liberia if we went back to them with figures. If we do that, it will be the Princess Rainforest Project plus Norway, two extremely wealthy group of people coming together to say, don't export timber from Liberia, harvest what you need to build Liberia, and we will pay you to keep your forest standing. It strikes me as odd that there is an argument within the FDA that people would prefer to be chainsaw operators in Riverside and Nigeria instead of government getting this money and reinvesting it into the rural economy. Because that is the only condition. You have to demonstrate to them how that money will benefit the rural economy. How are you going to put into agriculture? How are you going to put into NTFP value chain, non-timber forest products value chain? How are you going to invest that in small forest enterprises? For example, setting up small processing facilities in Riverside or in Sino, where people can begin to produce the panados in Riverside and ship them to Monrovia to be sold in the store. And you tell me that people would prefer to be chainsaw operators for logging companies above that? I find it really difficult to believe. But that's a very long answer to a short question. But what I'm trying to say is, if we can go down that road, if we can access that amount of money, keeping our forest standing, and accessing $25, $30, $40 million per year. These people, by the way, they just set up a $1.5 billion fund for Brazil. Last year they gave $100 million to Tanzania, where they even got forests. They don't have much forest. Liberia, they see Liberia as an opportunity in West Africa because we still have most of the forests coming from Togo all the way down, going towards Nigeria. We still have the largest tract of rainforest. So they see Liberia as a viable opportunity in West Africa. But the indication we are getting is that the FDA is not keen on that. But this is an issue that I said to Honorable Woods in an email. I think it would be wrong for the FDA to make a decision about this behind closed doors without a public debate on the issue. I think people need to be informed, the legislators need to be informed, the public need to be made aware, so that if the logging industry doesn't bring the $25 million, we can ask questions. Why we allow this opportunity to go? We hope that they will bring these issues to the public for us to have a discussion about that. But that is one way that I think the forestry sector will be able to contribute in very rapid manner to poverty reduction in Liberia. Of the Princess Rainforest Project proposal, so if you need copies of that, I can also send you a copy.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you to please do that for us, so that at least if you have put it in your presentation, you would have done very well for us. But since you have a proposal there, could you please make it available to us so that we'll be able to digest it better than what we've done now. Thank you so much.
Mr. Silas Siakor, Director of Sustainable Development Institute, we all at the Commission thank you very much for your valuable contribution to this process. And your testimony have just ended, and you said so much in the last. I don't know if you have anything else you would like to say beyond what you have said. Otherwise, we want to say thank you very much, and you may kindly leave with the thanks of the Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hearing Officer, we stand adjourned till further notice.